I'm honored to have the chance to introduce the first panel of the day on regional collaboration. It is one that I'm looking forward to personally. My company has long been involved in economic development efforts across the state. In Lexington, we partner with Commerce Lexington. We work with GLI in Louisville. We work with the state itself overall. It's a natural for us. We're a statewide company and work on those efforts across the state. More relevant to this upcoming panel, if you recall last year when the mayors of Lexington and Louisville announced their new BEAM project, the collaboration between Lexington and Louisville. KU and our sister company in Louisville, LG&E, received invitations from the mayors of Lexington and Louisville to support those projects, that project, and we were happy to agree to do that. We look forward, even as we go down that road on the BEAM project, we're looking forward to this next panel to learn a little bit on of what others are doing on regional collaboration, and I'm thrilled to have the chance to introduce these folks. One of our panelists we had the opportunity to meet and hear a little from on Wednesday. David Brown is the president and CEO of the Omaha Chamber. We had a chance to hear from him, and between his remarks and Bob Quick's affirmation of what a quality guy he is and what a great job he does, we learned about his background with chambers in Fort Wayne and in Greenville, one of the cities that we've visited recently, and there's a whole lot more detail on his background. 30 years in economic development and chamber leadership. I'll let you read the details, but I'll just pull out a couple of highlights and accomplishments since he's been here in Omaha for the last 9 or 10 years. And under David's leadership since 2004, the Omaha Economic Development Partnership has landed 391 projects, tremendous amount of projects, and those projects have represented more than 22,000 jobs and more than $4 billion in investment, all incredible accomplishments, and we're pleased to have them, and I'll invite you up in just a moment. One of our other panelists we have not yet met, I met just a moment ago this morning, Dana Bradford, CEO of Waitt Company. I had to do a little research and find out what that is. Waitt Company is an Omaha-based investment company with holdings in private and public companies, alternative investments, and real estate. And Dana has been a member of the Waitt Company board since 2004 and assumed the role of president and CEO early 2012. In addition to his duties as CEO, Dana serves as executive chairman of Prince Global Sports, which is an international racket sports company, and he's also, you'll notice in your program, the impressive list of associations and leadership positions he has. He's a director on the boards of a Scottsdale-based national home builder, a San Diego-based real estate investment company, a Wichita-based consumer products company, and an Omaha-based provider of customer satisfaction data. In addition to his leadership in the business community, Dana is also a community leader and serves or has served on the boards of the Children's Hospital and Medical Center, the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce, and many, many other organizations listed in your booklet. And the panel will be moderated by our own Bob Quick, and we all know him well. We appreciate him, and I will ask Bob and the other gentlemen to come on up and take the stage. Thank you for being here. Help me welcome them.
Good morning. I can tell it was a long night, but a good one.
Be quiet, Bob. It's the Paxton effect.
Yes. So the power of regional partnering. What I want to do is I want to break up this portion of our program into different segments. First, I want to have Dana talk about the dynamics of an 8-county area that he serves, which includes Omaha, but not Lincoln, but it gets close. And he's going to talk about that. But before Dana speaks, and before we have each of our different speakers talk, I'm going to try to draw the parallel about what we do in Central Kentucky so that you've got a baseline or a point of reference which to compare. Second, I want to set up how unique this year's trip is. We have lots of things in common with our host city and also with the Omaha-Lincoln region. We want to explore those connections, especially how the region works together, or not, So we've asked everybody to be very candid, be very honest, what works, what doesn't, what you're indifferent about, but what you know you need to do to strengthen your ties. So we want to talk about strengths, weaknesses, challenges, opportunities. Third, I want to introduce to you Craig Richard a little bit later. We're going to let him sit out here in the audience. He's been one of us the last couple of days. Craig's the new CEO at GLI, and many of you I know have had a chance to meet him, and I know some of you have not. So I feel a little bad because I said he was at Keeneland with us already. We're getting him over to Lexington, Central Kentucky a lot. I said, I want to put you on the spot. I said, but you know what? No pressure. Just draw observations about what you think, observations about what you've witnessed so far and what you think could happen to strengthen the ties and the bonds between us. And then we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Q&A. So here's the thing. In your mind, be thinking about questions that you have about the different segments. We're going to try to hold everything till the end as far as the Q&A part, but I really feel strongly that this is the part where you can ask that unique, tailored question from our region to theirs or something you picked up on from them. Sound good? All right. Sounds like a plan. All righty. So we also want to make this as informal and interactive. That's, as you see, the stage set up here. And let's get going. So let's start with Central Kentucky. We have an 8-county effort, economic development effort called Bluegrass Alliance. How many people have heard of Bluegrass Alliance? Oh, good. I'm a little surprised because a lot of times that's a behind-the-scenes group. And it's our economic development professionals that come together. There's a few other economic development professional entities that join them, and they'll meet on an as-need basis, but typically Jenna would probably say every month and a half, every couple months. We have an agenda that could be on a topic of an issue, a challenge, a concern, an opportunity. A lot of times they're opportunities. But when you pull people together from an 8-county area, and our 8-county area is Fayette County, the contiguous counties, and Franklin. And when you pull people together, and I know I've heard many of you, we've heard the theme here, but we talk about it a lot in Lexington. It's amazing how you can build a level of trust. From that trust comes more cooperation and interaction. And so Bluegrass Alliance, from a job standpoint, economic development, I would tell you, is the group that really started building the trust in our region a long time ago. So Jenna's co-chair, and so sometimes it's patting somebody on the back for a success, because oftentimes people press us, we're not doing enough, or it's taking an issue like workforce development and figuring out how do we take care of this challenging, perplexing problem. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but many people are becoming a lot more familiar on a public policy component in Central Kentucky. It's called the Central Kentucky Regional Public Policy Group. Kind of sexy name, right? Yeah, okay. So, but it is what it is. It's a regional group that comes together, the same 8 counties, and really what we're trying to do there, and I see Lenny in the back, Luther was one of the architect founders, is to pull the region together on the one thing, the one set of things that have divided us, issues. And what we found over the last 8 years, because a lot of our focus has been federal, we have a common agenda, we take it out to D.C., we get a lot of respect now because we don't have 8, 10, 15, 20 different agendas. We have one, and we have a set of issues. And that's been a real helpful thing. Public policy sets up good economic development. You can't have one without the other. So we really have found that we do like each other in this 8-county area. Even on public policy issues, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but vital issues that we've been able to come together and surround ourselves with. So those are really the 2 initiatives. We have our own Bluegrass Business Development partnership within Fayette County. I see Kevin Atkins over here. So we have the city. We have the University of Kentucky, Tom, Steve, and we have quite a unique cooperation there, but I want to focus more on the regional piece that we do. So, Dana, I've kind of tried to help set this up for you to kind of talk about your 8-county area, the dynamics of it, how it works, what you're trying to get out of it, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Well, good morning. I'll cover a few things and really try and set up for a better Q&A session. The first thing I'd mention is that one of the benefits that we've had in Omaha is engaged community leadership, and the fact that you guys are here in Omaha trying to figure out how to be better leaders in your community. You're a long way down the road to being able to figure out how to better your communities. One of the things that we have found as we pursued bettering Omaha was that while we were doing that, a lot of the surrounding communities were trying to do it as well, but they're developed a pretty intense us and them mentality. And as we competed for jobs and education, best school systems, and so forth, I think over the last 10 years, our region has realized that we have to think collaboratively, not competitively. That in my mind was really the big change, because if the group, the area, the leaders in the area don't think like that, aren't willing to think collaboratively, it's very difficult to bridge roads into collaborative thinking that can create a greater good for the region. And that's taken a lot of effort by David, and Jason will talk a little bit about Lincoln. I'll talk a little bit about Lincoln. The 8 counties that Bob references are around Omaha, but do not include Lancaster County, which is only a 40-minute drive away, and that includes Lincoln, Nebraska. So to maybe give you a couple of relevant comparisons, Lincoln and Omaha are 40 minutes apart, and they have about 2/3 of the state's population in those 2 cities. And our relationship there regionally is very, very important. Then when you come over into Omaha and look at the 8 counties, what defines the 8-county area really is, we looked at how many people drive into Omaha. And when you look and say, okay, 25% or more of the workforce in how many counties drive into Omaha, that really defined our 8 counties. That's why we're looking at this 8-county region as we branch out to try and create more collaborative thinking. And I'll tell you, it's been amazing for me. I've been involved in a planning organization called Heartland 2050. And you start to meet with these people, and you start to meet with planners, school superintendents, Health and Human Services, and all of these different organizations that go to bettering the community. And you look at the challenges they're having, the excess capacity and physical assets, the funding challenges at a state level. It's pretty overwhelming. And I would say that we're very excited about the fact that we're proactively out there thinking about this, because as I think you guys probably know in your state government, funding's becoming tougher and tougher every day. And David spent a lot of time trying to bring our tax base down so we can become competitive for job growth. So as we're working through this, we're also trying to figure out how to utilize assets. Well, if you get into utilization, then you're starting to talk about merger of resources. Very difficult. In our area, the 8 counties includes 2 states, which makes it even harder. So where we are in this process really is what I'd call community outreach. David and others are constantly out there talking to these communities to convince them that we, as the lead community, being the largest community in Omaha, are truly committed to collaborative process, that we are not trying to feather our nest at their expense. And we've got some work to do. You know, a good symbolic sense of where we are is if you look at the beautiful pedestrian bridge out there that were paid by your federal tax dollars, it's a bridge to nowhere. It bridges over to Council Bluffs. Council Bluffs has always looked at their community differently. So this is a community that's of probably about 80,000 people, clearly in our MSA, and they've never brought their development to the riverfront. And they've always tried to stay away from Omaha in their planning. And just now they're beginning to think, okay, well, how do we come to the river? And this bridge is really one of a bridge over to that community. And for years our chambers operated independent of one another, and now we're trying to bring all that together. The one thing we haven't been able to do is have success. One of the great things for momentum is success, where you have a project, where you demonstrate the power of this collaborative thinking. And so we're very early in this process, and I'll stop there and then just invite you guys to ask me questions about where we are in that process as we evolve forward. The one that I'll just touch on briefly, because both David and Jason will cover it, is for years we've had an us and them mentality battle with Lincoln. Very competitive in jobs and education. We have a college in Omaha that really needs to stay in the shadow of the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. It needs to stay commuter. It shouldn't grow. Well, we've finally been able to break those chains, and the mentality is let's try and make everything as great as it possibly can, and we're all working together. And Omaha has provided dollars to Lincoln to better that community, and Lincoln has supported us in key legislation for economic incentive. So now we're back working, thanks to Jason and others, to where we're truly making a difference. And both Lincoln and Omaha are really excited about their future and how they're working together. I'll kick it over to Dave, or back to you, Bob, I guess.
Yep, let me kind of push us into another area here, and we're going to start to get into that Lincoln, Omaha, Louisville, Lexington piece. But again, let me set it up a little bit of what we do back home, and how our two, and here's an interesting parallel, the two largest cities in Nebraska are Omaha and Lincoln. The two largest cities in Kentucky, Louisville, Lexington. So there's a lot of things here I think we can learn from each other on, but let me set it up. I remember when the BEAM announcement was made, the Bluegrass Economic Advancement Movement, and people were saying, it's finally happened. We finally have Louisville, Lexington working together. And I can remember for some of us, for Commerce Lexington, we have an incredible relationship with GLI. We've been working together for years on issues. And then it kind of hit me what was going on is that, the one area we've never been able to get over was, or figure out how to work together on, was how do the two governments. So here we have two mayors, business minds, and I mean, they go right to the jugular on advanced manufacturing. It's starting to go over into biotech. And how do we not just save what we got, how do we grow it? So it was more of that sense of people saying, finally, but I think a lot of people may not know what we do together. So what I want to do real quickly is just talk about the things that GLI and Commerce Lexington do together. Then I'm going to throw it over here to David and Jason and let them talk about what they do. And then I think in your minds you can see similarities and see differences. So let's start with from a public policy standpoint. And also you're going to hear me weave in Northern Kentucky. So it's not just Louisville, Lexington, but we've got a triangle here area that we often work with. So Greater Louisville Inc., the Northern Kentucky Chamber, and Commerce Lexington, we do get together and talk periodically about public policy. We want to make sure we're in sync with each other. Some of that's through just that pick up the phone, texting, or it's through sit downs where we are all around the same table. We have a Metro Chamber public policy group that Northern Kentucky, GLI, and Commerce Lexington we set up. The idea is let's get Paducah, let's get all these other points in between from Pikeville to Paducah, so it's not just the three. Let's start to get also the big metros. So we've got, now we got Bowling Green, Paducah, Owensboro, Ashland, and Frankfort becoming a major player, so another success. Joe Reagan, Craig's predecessor, and I used to talk frequently, and neither one of us had a problem picking up the phone and talking about issues. The issues we are finding, guess what? The issues actually, Alan Stein, they bring us together. We have a lot less in common than we do together. So bridges, expanded gaming, tax reform, I could go on with a whole list. We kind of like each other. We're finding out more about our issues, and guess what? They're the same. Our economic development staff leaders work together. The Northern Kentucky Triad group, which Dan Taberky runs, GLI, Commerce Lexington, we meet periodically. We just hosted Craig, Dan Taberky, and their staffs out of Keeneland. Thank you, Vince. You're here in the audience, but Bill Thomason's like, let's use this facility, let's build region, and guess what? We had a great time there. So we had that going on. So economic development standpoint, we have, again, the three large entities in our state. They work well together. And Eileen Pickett, Daryl Snyder, GLI, and then I got to tell you, I don't want people thinking that it's Bob Quick that does the stuff. Jenna Greathouse, Kimberly Rossetti, her staff is just absolutely incredible. And so they all do talk, and they like each other, and they respect each other. Then we have regional recruiting trips we do. We do that through Advantage Kentucky. Would you ever imagine the day when you have Northern Kentucky, Louisville, and Lexington selling each other collectively together to the people, site consultants in the big markets? And guess what? It's worked very effectively. And then they pushed it even harder. Let's get the rest of the state out marketing all of the Commonwealth. And that's done through Kentucky United, of which probably we put a lot of money into, and we do participate as well. But again, it's to sell the Commonwealth, so people know who we are. David talked about, some of the folks from Gallup talked about how a lot of times people just didn't know who Omaha was. Well, sometimes we have that same issue. And then the Bluegrass Economic Advancement Movement, BEAM, I don't want to make that sound like it's a lesser of all those things. It's probably the most prominent piece of all that now. So we have all those things in common. Leadership trips, joint trip in 2010. To Pittsburgh, 315 people went, so it was a little bit larger crowd than this. And guess what we found out? We like each other even more, so we're starting to do some social things. And now we're talking about that little sweet spot, those international fam tours. GLI's gone a different direction than we have, but guess what? Members can go either way, but we're talking about, do we do one together? Do we go to some hot spot in the world that maybe we can build connections? So staff like each other, leadership likes each other. Now, what I want to do is turn it over here to our panel. Jason, David, what I want you to do is talk about regionalism, what you do together, separate from your point of view, and let me just throw some things out here that I want you to kind of think about. So provide us some unique perspective on regionalism from your vantage point, how it works, and maybe what your challenges are. Do you have any regional initiatives that you that do tie you together? How do you pull together to work together to advance the economy in your mega region? And is it just the two large cities, or is it a lot of points in between? When it comes to competing nationally and globally, how do you work together? So is a lot of your focus just more regional here, or do you also go out on a larger basis? I know, David, you've talked some about that. Is there a good, bad competitive rivalry? Do sports unite you, divide you? You know, we got the Louisville, Lexington, we got U of L, University of Kentucky. We sometimes get into spirited debates. As long as one of us wins a national championship, I'm okay, but some aren't. As long as it's one of those two schools, and then just anything else that you would talk about. So, David, you want me to have you start us off?
I jump in. Jason and I have talked about how we're kind of going to split this up. We do a lot of things between Omaha and Lincoln, and it's been growing, I think, by leaps and bounds over the past decade or so. So I'm going to talk about some of the more public policy and other things that we do. Jason's going to talk a lot about how we do work economic development-wise, and then we can answer questions about how we would do that in between. The Omaha area economic development, just very briefly, is a partnership in the region. So we represent 5 counties in this area, so everything on this side of the river and our MSA essentially is part of our economic development partnership. It's kind of a unique partnership in that each of the counties that are part of our partnership each have their own economic development organization that's a freestanding, separate organization for their counties. They're responsible for raising the money for the staff costs and benefits. They don't have offices in their home county. They all office with us in downtown Omaha. They're all part of our economic development staff at the chamber, and we provide all the rest of their costs that they need to do economic development. So travel, entertainment, consulting, public relations, marketing, anything it takes to do economic development, they're part of our team and they spend our dollars. And we have a policy that it doesn't really matter where to us the company locates. If the company needs 50 acres, we show them every 50-acre site in the region, and where the company says is best for them, that's where we help them locate. So it isn't unusual for the Sarpy County person to be the lead project manager for something that ends up in downtown Omaha, or one of our economic development staff to be the lead person landing something in Washington County. So it's a very unique partnership. It is a lot of relationship-based, and we work really hard on that relationship with their boards and with their elected officials in those counties. So we have a regional economic development partnership, but that is only part of the regional story, because I think really, as was mentioned earlier, 2/3 of the population in the state resides in between Lincoln and the state line to the east, which includes us. And so as the largest 2 cities and really the economic machine for the state, we've had to figure out ways that we can be productive together. So here's some things that we do to work together as chambers so that we can start thinking about things globally. First, I think the most important thing that we do is our executive committees meet 3 times a year with the governor together. So the Omaha Executive Committee, the Lincoln Board Executive Committee, and the governor meet 3 times a year to talk about public policy initiatives, legislative initiatives. It's hosted each time by one of the other chambers, the state chamber, Lincoln Chamber, or us. And we have a really aggressive, I think, legislative initiative comes out of those discussions. And our members get to know each other and get to hear what each other's thoughts and comments are. And so it isn't unusual for us to have our executive committee members and Lincoln's, as well as the state chambers, run into each other down at the halls in the legislature, working on the same issue, orchestrating testimony, working really well together on issues. That's a big deal. Now, we also try, the Omaha Chamber and Lincoln Chamber Exec Committee, try and get together a couple times a year for social events. So it may be a golf outing. After a brief lunch, we'll have a presentation, or maybe around a Husker game, but something that essentially says we're all going to come together and do something together like you guys are, kind of rub elbows and get to know each other a bit better. We feel that if our leadership is engaged and comfortable, it makes it even easier for our staff, who are already destined to be working together anyway. Just makes it a lot easier for us to work together. We've sponsored a joint Washington fly-in, so instead of us all going out to Washington, We've done a reverse fly-in where we bring our senators and congressmen to this region. We'll have 700 or 800 people show up for a one-day session with these legislators. We've done it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years in a row. We're probably going to not do it this year and revisit it again next year, so we'll be doing individual fly-ins on specific issues to DC this year. But it's always interesting to have 700 people from 3 different chambers show up in the SAC Museum and question the senators and congressmen about things that are important to us. And that was a great kind of vocal or public way to show that we are doing things together. Every year, the Lincoln Chamber and the Omaha Chamber work with other chambers and business leaders across the state to vet state Senate candidates. We have a unique unicameral structure here. We have one house in our legislature, so there's 49 senators. They all have term limits, and so in any given year, 19 or 20 Senate spots could be up for running. We go out as a team with all of our chambers, interview candidates across the state, decide which candidates we're going to support with our PACs, and the companies as well as the chambers then typically support all those candidates so they can have a good group of people that we can work with in the legislature. Right now, about 80% of the people in the legislature have been vetted and supported by these 3 chambers and the business PACs that are out there engaging together. Public policy-wise, we always have a consistent public policy agenda. Lincoln and Omaha tend to have some local issues that we also seek support for from each other, but we always seem to have 4 or 5 points that we're all going down there working on together. So Jason's colleague at the Lincoln Chamber, Bruce Bohr, is involved tightly with our lobbyists who are constantly down there working on the legislative agenda. So I think we have figured out a way to, on a public policy perspective, engage as though we are one team, speaking with one voice, trying to get something accomplished. And I'll give you one example, then I'll turn it over to Jason. About 3 years ago, you remember all the debate about public employee unions and all the stuff that went on in Wisconsin, and all of a sudden there was a series of states across the country that were looking at how those public employee unions function. Well, we have an organization in this state called the Commission of Industrial Relations, and it is the place where public employee unions file grievances, contract grievances against public units of government. And this body has been in place for a long, long time, and over time it had become decidedly labor unbalanced, to a point where we thought both the process and the membership of the group was such that you really couldn't get a deal down there that wasn't going to cost you more rather than cost you less. And so during this whole debate, we decided instead of trying to throw out public employee unions one altogether, and we are a right-to-work state, by the way, we decided to focus our attention on the Commission of Industrial Relations. The only reason this is important is the 3 people that led this charge were the chairman of the Omaha Chamber, the chairman of the Lincoln Chamber, and the chairman of the State Chamber. Those 3 business leaders were the pointy end of the spear to make this effort happen in the legislature. And they pulled together meeting after meeting of their boards and of other key constituents. The staff provided all kinds of support in the background, obviously, to make it happen. But in the end, it was clear that without those 3 leaders saying with one voice, this is the change we want to see and why we want to see it, the legislature, I don't think, would have had the courage to move forward and make the changes that they've made. And you can always tell whether these things are successful by how aggressively, particularly organized labor, stays away from using them. And I don't think we've had a case filed since the commission changed because it is a very different policy now that was in place. And so what we think we have caused is more arbitration happening locally and more agreements happening locally. And once eventually it gets to this panel, we believe that there's actually going to be more fairness in the decisions that they make. So that's just one really good example of how staff and volunteers engage with each other to make sure our public policy agendas work together. And maybe you can talk about the economic development part of it.
Yep, absolutely. As mentioned, my name is Jason Smith, and I'm the Vice President of Economic Development in Lincoln, Nebraska. So a bit of history. About 10 years ago, Lincoln went through the task of rebuilding their economic development program, which at that time was notoriously really bad. Probably one of the worst in the United States, definitely terrible in Nebraska, because they got to the point where they were telling the state not to even bring them clients, and it was just not great. So there was an enormous change in philosophy among the leadership, and that was all done through the business leadership in the community that said, you know what, this is enough. We're going to take this back over and rebuild the program. And so they brought in a complete new team, and one of the first things as I came in, I would hear two things. Number one was, you need to go work with Omaha, but then you'd ask the question, well, what does that mean? And deathly silence. I mean, nobody really could answer that question. Then the other one was, you had a group of people that would say, you can't work with Omaha, they won't work with you. And my answer to that was, well, give me an example, and they might or they might not. But the question at that time was, well, what are we bringing to the table? And so it would get deathly quiet again. I think their idea of working with was, well, Omaha should help us and us not have to do anything. And so we were very fortunate in 2004 and 5, which is about the same time that we were revamping our program, that the state and the Omaha chambers and some of our other partners around the state decided we needed to revamp our incentive system. And so we did a joint project where we did a research project and looked at incentive programs around the United States. And then David and my boss and the Department of Economic Development director threw all the leading economic developers and accountants in a room and said, don't come out till you come up with a plan. And you learn a lot about people when you're locked in a room for 6 months. And my counterpart in Omaha, Rod Mosman, who many of you may know has been here, I think 100 years, a long time. Yeah. And I became very good friends through that process. And it wasn't that we always agreed, and it wasn't, I'm not going to sit here and say that we were best friends, but we became very comfortable working with each other. We became very respectful of each other. And I think Rod realized, because again, Rod saw these things that were going on in Lincoln, and he knew the situation in Lincoln, what it was. I think he realized that we were for real and were ready to be a significant player. And so I think that's kind of where that started. And we always approached the standpoint when we would have ideas, is that we always wanted to make sure we knew, because we're the smaller community, we always wanted to make sure we knew what our value, what we were bringing to the table when we would sit down and ask for a partnership arrangement. And so we continued to build, and we really did most of it through the state. And I don't know how strong the state of Kentucky is, but we really wanted to bring the rest of the state along with us. We didn't want to perceive it to be just Lincoln and Omaha, and David mentioned his regional group. We have more of a regional collaboration among some of our smaller communities that's primarily marketing based, so that when we go to trade shows, we go with, there's a group of about 8 counties that are part of our association. And so we really wanted to make it less about, because there's, again, I don't know how this is in Kentucky, but you can get a perception of, well, it's always about Lincoln and Omaha, it's always about Lincoln and Omaha. And so we wanted to make sure everybody knew that it was a bigger effort and not just the 2 cities that were trying to control everything. But in the interim, we've also been able to build some additional collaborative opportunities. We've gone to trade shows strictly as Omaha and Lincoln. We've done some work together through a project that David, I'm sure, can talk a lot about, is the I-80 Corridor project, where we're trying to build relationships between Lincoln and Omaha and our communities that are in between along the interstate, because we feel that's a significant advantage for us. I would say that the cumulative and where this has really shown itself was last year when, and actually we started the process 3 years ago, when we made the bid as a state, and I think it was one of the first times that had been done, as a state to host the Industrial Asset Management Council Conference. And it's the first major conference of this type that Nebraska has ever hosted. And again, we made the decision we were going to bid on that as a state, even though it was going to be in this, actually in this room, but in this hotel. And 10 years ago, we could have never pulled anything like that off, because, I mean, Omaha has a lot of resources, but they didn't have enough resources to do that on their own. I think Omaha was the smallest community they'd ever had put that in. And we were able to raise probably 2/3 of the money required to pull that conference off outside of Omaha, even though it was in Omaha. And so I think the collaborative effort between our 2 chambers, particularly in the economic development side, has made a difference. One of the things that we've really preached, and again, it's tough to say if you have the same dynamic in Kentucky, is that our leadership is under a perception that we compete on every project. The truth of the matter is we don't really directly compete on very many, if any, projects. And it's because our communities are so different in terms of the makeup of the communities that and the site selection process has become so precise that by the time they narrow it down, we may both submit on a project, but depending on what the objectives of that project are, generally one of us gets eliminated in that process. So as an example, Omaha really is focused on data centers. And Lincoln, not so much. It's not one of our major focuses because of some of the situations we have with our municipal power. So we'll submit on data centers. Generally, we get eliminated on big ones. Generally, we get eliminated. Omaha is very competitive, and we don't compete directly on those projects. Another example the other way is we were working on a major IT project. Omaha has huge demand on IT workers because of some of the business that's coming out of Offutt. We are probably underutilized, some of our IT people coming out of the university are probably underutilized, so Omaha was eliminated in that process. We were included in the final search on that process. So that's typically the situation, and so what we've had to do is constantly preach that we can be chasing the same projects, but 9 times out of 10, we're not going to be in the finals on those projects. So that's, I think, how we're trying to get around some of the competitive issues. And fortunately, everybody's a Husker fan, so we don't have the sports problems that other people have. So,
And Jason says that lightly, but I got to tell you how important that is. We have one state institution that has a dynamic football team. It is the religion here. So from a Lincoln and Omaha perspective, we don't have the worry of which university you're going to support. In basketball, Lincoln has a basketball team too, and it's on the rise, but Creighton is clearly the big Division I program in the state, and it's being supported that way. Baseball, Nebraska seems to have the Division I program. Creighton does too, but Nebraska seems to be better. And University of Nebraska at Omaha has the only Division I hockey program in the state. And so we have this really interesting scenario where we don't have a lot of competitiveness on the college side. And so we all agree who ought to win. And that really helps us kind of walk into meetings with something in common with everybody we talk to. Everybody wants to see something happen positively at Nebraska or Creighton, and we can kind of use that as a leg up. The last thing I might add to you real quickly before we get to some questions, Bob, Jason mentioned the corridor. About 7 years ago or so, the legislature created an I-80 Corridor Commission. And the idea was to think about how the development between Lincoln and Omaha could be enhanced. And our concern was that there are a bunch of counties along that corridor, each that have their own planning departments, each that have their own land use planning processes, each that have their own desires and visions, what their communities are look like. And we were really afraid that we were going to see this hodgepodge of development suck up all the good land between Omaha and Lincoln, and we wouldn't be able to use it as a strategic tool for development between the two cities. So the legislature created this commission. The commission did a bunch of studies, came back and said there were really 3 things that we needed to be able to do. We needed to be able to market the corridor, we needed to have kind of a consistent planning process for the corridor, and we had to worry about site development along the corridor. So the group that Dana actually is working with as part of this vision process is called MAPA, the Metropolitan Area Planning Association. I don't know what your MPO is, but you've got one somewhere around Lincoln and Louisville. I don't know what you call it. But we asked them to come in and actually do the planning all the way from Lincoln to Omaha for this corridor work. Now that's a major departure because they don't go into Lancaster County as kind of their official territory. So it's a big deal that Lincoln and Omaha agreed. First off, Lincoln and Omaha agreed to jump in and say, we'll lead this charge. So between the Lincoln Chamber and the Omaha Chamber, we've agreed to organize the effort to lead this corridor development process. MAPA is going to do the planning. The State Department of Economic Development is going to worry about site development. And then Jason's shop and our shop are going to worry about marketing the corridor between the two of us for development. And so Jason's team has been working with ours to develop language in all of our materials that talk about the corridor, that talk about the assets and the resources there. So we do joint marketing along that corridor. And incidental to that, Lincoln is now developing the Innovation Campus, which is a university and City of Lincoln kind of sponsored campus for technology and research. And at the same time, Dana's been very involved in us creating kind of our own Exarban Village, which is where you were at the Mammal Hall the other day, the business school. Just south of that is kind of where our vision of that kind of a place is, where mixed use and development and research can take place. So we've done some physical things as well. We didn't mention the European office that we do together. We've opened a Nebraska office of the two of us fund. So we're doing that together as Lincoln and Omaha. So there's a lot of ways that we can partner together. We're always looking for more. Is it perfect? Not even close. Is it being productive? Yeah, I really think it is. And I think we're working really hard to make sure the relationship stays strong so we can continue to be successful with it. So.
Okay, I want to throw a question. Where are the rubs? Where are the things that tend to still divide you? And then it sounds like you've really developed the relationships, but when you deal with these difficult areas and actually identify some of those, how do you overcome those?
Well, I think from our perspective, there's always going to be some rub. I mean, you are two communities with two mayors and two councils and the parochial pride that every community gets. And so there's always going to be someone in every city that says, gosh, I wish we could do that better than them, or why are we working with them? But that's getting more and more diminished, I think, as time goes on, mostly because the two business communities have really engaged a lot in projects across the state. So whether it's, you saw Chris Kircher yesterday from ConAgra, they're the first investor in Innovation Park with a new research facility. Makes a lot of sense to have a food company kind of doing some work down there. And similarly, University of Nebraska Foundation was one of the first partners and tenants in our park at RuralUrban Village. So there's a lot of those things happen. So the more we do that, the less rub there is. There's always kind of a rural-urban thing, but that's kind of focused at both of us, where the western part of the state is shrinking in population, and a lot of those folks are coming to our cities, and there's a concern about how the rural part of the state's going to survive. And so both Lincoln and we have to be engaged in kind of the growth of the whole state rather than just worrying about our own backyard. That's probably the biggest rub, I would think, is rural and urban.
Another one would be the Gallup. If you saw the Gallup building over here, Gallup used to be an employer in Lincoln. They were growing. They were looking at airports. They were looking at bringing a lot of people in, and they site selected Omaha and became an important part of a redevelopment of downtown Omaha. Employers, when they come in and look at Omaha and Lincoln, Omaha does have some features that certain employees like, and it is a rub to Lincoln because Lincoln's trying to grow jobs too. And one of the things that we've got to spend a lot of time is profiling the strengths of each community so they understand why certain employers might be looking at one community versus another and lessen the rub, to use Bob's term.
Did I miss something, Jason? Maybe we have some rub.
No, I mean, I think that what I see, and I see less of, I think that's diminishing some of the things you talked about. We all have different priorities, and so I think it's trying to balance. For instance, and recently we had a situation where the University of Nebraska, which has a campus in Omaha and Lincoln, was going for funding for certain projects, and it just feels like sometimes the leadership, and I would say it's the leadership more than the staffs, says, well, if you're going to do that in Lincoln, you have to do this in Omaha, or if you're going to do this in Omaha, you have to do this in Lincoln, and if you're going to do it in Omaha and Lincoln, you have to do it somewhere else. Yeah. And so I think it's hard to prioritize when you have situations like that. I would say that's probably the biggest challenge, but I think that's probably everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm going to break a little bit with how I set this up. I'm going to have Craig come up a little bit towards the end here, but questions that you may have. I think right now it's kind of the topic's hot. One of the things I'm still trying to figure out is how do you get over that divide, the rural-urban? And I know that, because we say this a lot, the more we make in our metro area, the more we give to the state, but the perception often is that the rich want more at the others' expense. I mean, that's got to be an issue, and how do you overcome that?
You know, I don't think it's a Lincoln-Omaha issue as much as it's a rural-urban issue. And honestly, both Lincoln Chamber and we spend inordinate amounts of time outstate. I mean, I spend a good chunk of my summer visiting chambers across the state. My staff spends inordinate amounts of time of their year working with other communities across the state and engaging with their senators and with their chambers and with their business communities. Because frankly, as much as I hate to admit it, I don't think Jason's group or ours can depend upon the senators in Lincoln and Omaha to pass pro-business legislation all by themselves. We need partners across the state in order to get bills passed. Matter of fact, if you just looked at the delegation from Lincoln and Omaha, and if there was enough votes to pass something, I'm not sure we could get a majority to vote for a pro-business piece of legislation. So we've got to engage the rest of the state to work with them and find ways that we can have common ground so we can get their senators supportive of pro-business legislation in the state. So I think we have gone a long ways towards kind of dissolving some of those issues. You know, there's this thing called a cattleman's ball that you'll see 500 Omahans at. And I don't know how many from Lincoln, but a whole bunch of them are going to be from Lincoln. Union Pacific Railroad has arranged a train to go from here all the way to the western part of the state. so 150 folks can come from this market to be out there. We are very serious about developing relationships in the rest of the state so we can be successful. So it isn't solving all the ills, but the more we're there, the more we're developing relationships, the more there's an understanding of our issues, the better off we are. And then when stuff bubbles up, at least you got a face to go talk to, because you've been there before and they can at least respect you for that.
Yeah, but Bob, one thing I'd add to that is there is an education that is taking place in our region that needs to continue. For example, if you were to drive just outside of Omaha into Iowa, you'd get into what we refer to as bedroom communities, Glenwood, Iowa. They're being educated on the fact that the success of Omaha leads to people working in Omaha but seeking a more rural community and living in Glenwood. So they're figuring out the success of Omaha definitely betters that community, their schools, and so forth. And then one of the things we're working on, and this is really through David's leadership, every job for Omaha was considered a good job. And that's really not true. I mean, if you look at, if we had an employer that came and said, I've got 100 employees and I want the average wage to be $9 or $10, and we want to be in Omaha, or we want to expand in Omaha, the reality is that's not a good wage in Omaha, and you're going to be challenged to retain quality employees. Now, if you move into Avoca, Iowa, and build a plant, there'll be a line of people out the door that'll want to work for $9 or $12 an hour. So trying to find the right jobs for the right communities, we're starting to think like that, and that's an education process. And that'll go a long way to bringing us together more collaboratively.
I would say one other thing. We're very good at engaging the state chamber, and the state chamber is very strong in rural Nebraska. And they're engaged in all of our public policy activities. And then we are very inclusive of our State Department of Economic Development, and they're very strong in the rural counties. And so we always make sure we include them, and then they can bring the people to the table that they think is necessary as well.
And Jason mentioned the IAMC conference. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's a collection of all of the manufacturing corporate site selectors for the largest manufacturers in the country are all part of this IAMC group. And for them to have an annual convention here and bring 350 site selectors to Nebraska was a big deal. Well, we could easily have said we're going to do it alone, but as Jason said, we need to have a broader representation. And actually, we had people from all over the state come in and participate in that process. The likelihood of Columbus, Nebraska, being able to get in front of 350 site selectors at any given time was nil. They would never have been able to do it. But by working together, we've been able to offer them opportunities too that I think has enhanced all of our relationships and the ability to grow businesses in all those cities. So I think we just keep trying to find more and more opportunities to work with state departments that have those relationships and other communities.
Questions?
Yes.
Come up to a microphone if you would.
Having decided to go across the river to the gambling, Kentucky's been flirting with legalized gambling, and you all have it there, but they're enjoying the economic benefit over in that other state,
Right.
and it looks like they're spending a lot of money, and we want to do it for the money. What advice do you have for us? Because you have the problems, but not the benefits.
That's exactly right.
That's a good point.
Oh, here comes a rub.
You want me
No.
to- I can answer this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the advantage. So, I appreciate being here today, and I'm representing Lincoln, and I love Nebraska. But actually, next month I've accepted a new position to be the Chamber of Commerce president in Abilene, Texas. So let me answer this question because I'm leaving. So if anybody gets mad, they can go, "That's that guy that went to Texas." Two of the major figures in this state, Warren Buffett and Dr. Tom Osborne, are both very anti-gambling, and it's been on the ballot a couple of times. And the two of them have actively campaigned against it, and until there's a change, I think, in that, I would say that it's not going to change in terms of what Nebraska decides to do with gambling.
You know who Warren Buffett is. Tom Osborne is a long-beloved football coach at the University of Nebraska, now the athletic director at Nebraska. Much beloved, and if the two of them come out against something, it's unlikely will happen. However, there are some, our chamber really took it on the chin. We supported it, this is before I got here, we supported it, gambling, and then a month later we decided not to support it and then 3 months later, we decided to sit on the fence. And so our membership is totally split on the issue.
Mitt Romney was the president.
He wanted to be, yeah. Our membership is split on the issue. Our exec committee was split on the issue. The citizenry was split on the issue. However, there is a foundation called the Iowa West Foundation that was established as a result of the casinos going into Iowa, and they get a lot of money every year exclusively from the casinos. And over the years, they have invested a lot of money in Nebraska for capital projects. Now, there are some years they do more than others. In the years when they don't do much, we complain and moan about it, and eventually they come back and do something big. So they've invested big in the new cancer center here. They've invested probably more than $100 million in Omaha over the years as a result of big projects coming here. And they know that they have some responsibility. Now, $100 million sounds like a lot of money. In the scheme of what they're getting and what's going into Iowa, that is a relatively small percentage. But nonetheless, you start talking about that many zeros, you're getting into some real money. So we do see some return from that, but we are seeing some of the social challenges that go along with it. There's no doubt about that. We have not tried or have been able to convince the citizenry that it makes sense for us to have gambling on this side of the river or anywhere else in Nebraska for that matter. And I think that's, aside from the Indian tribes, we're probably, I'd be really surprised if we saw the way our state structure is and the way legislation works here. I'd be really surprised if there could ever be a sort of a single casino thing on the ballot that everybody could vote for or against. Usually there's 2 or 3 if there's one, and that splits the vote so much that none of them ever win. So.
Okay, keep thinking. Oh, here we go. Question, Steve?
Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this morning. Would like to hear your comment about brain drain and maybe what the chambers are able to do in conjunction with the employers and the universities in particular to deal with students graduating and then moving elsewhere to find jobs.
Sure. You want to talk about Lincoln Stone?
Sure. So we're similar to Lexington. We have 30,000 students at the University of Nebraska, and we'll have anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 graduates on an annual basis that we would like to keep in Lincoln. So we recognize, first of all, about 7, 8 years ago, we created a young professionals group, which sounds a lot easier, and everybody sort of has one, but it sounds a lot easier than it really turned out to be. It took 3 shots at it before we finally were able to nail it and get it done right. And we have close to 1,000 members of that now, and so we consider that to be very successful. But about 3 years ago, our board decided to engage a youth branding firm to undergo an entire new way of thinking in terms of how you market your community to young professionals. And the one thing that I remember during that process, we at the same time we were starting up an angel fund IT fund in Lincoln, and one of the older, I say older, he was probably 45. One of the older guys in that process said, "You'll know you have it right." He was talking to my boss and me. "You know you have it right if you hate it." And because he says, it will not be targeted. Everything that this group's done for us, I hate, but it's always been the right move. And so it's a group, our Tribal is the name. They do all the youth branding for Red Bull and Adidas and some other well-known brands. It happens to be in Lincoln. And so they came in and underwent a complete new project basically that we unveiled in June, and it is more about using your people to tell your story and using your young people to tell your story. And so, it's goofy things like we put up these signs over the 4th of July that sort of referenced pop music and 4th of July together, and it would get put on Reddit and have 13 million views. And you're like, we spent $7,000 on these signs and got 13 million impressions. That's a pretty good rate of return on those kind of things. And then a couple weeks ago, we set the world's record for the largest Lincoln log structure and got national TV coverage all over the United States. But what it's really doing is generating our young people to say, man, Lincoln's really doing some things, and there's a lot of things going on. We're also investing enormously in our downtown, in our warehouse district. We're building a new 16,000-seat arena. That's actually being done by the same group that they basically all the people from Louisville that did the Center moved to Lincoln and now doing the Pinnacle Bank Arena. But there's just a lot of optimism and a lot of excitement, and we're trying to leverage that as much as we can, particularly in the entrepreneurship sector, to move that forward. And then Omaha has done some great things too. So.
I mentioned last time I had that brief introduction for you, we're worried about sense of place. A lot of that placemaking resulted from a lot of work we've done over the last 8 or 9 years with our young professionals and the research about what it's going to take to attract and keep young professionals and try to keep that brain drain from happening. Our YPC started with 6 people coming and talking to our chairman and I back in '03 and said, we'd like to see how you can engage us more in the community. You all have a young professionals group, I believe, so you kind of know how this process works. Well, now we have 5,000 people signed up for our young professionals group. We do an annual summit that has 1,500 people in attendance. We fill the CenturyLink Center across the way. Last year we had John Legend, the performer, was our keynote speaker. It's a full day of thousands of young professionals and even not so young professionals like myself and others who come to hear from young professionals about what they think we need to do to make this community a better place. So a lot of the work that we do is revolving around how do we make it an attractive place for young professionals and folks who are graduating from college. That's the second thing I'd raise is our college work here with Creighton in particular. We're very proud of the fact that the Creighton Business School, about 80% of their students are from out of Omaha, and yet 70% of their students stay here after they graduate and get a job here. So our role of them is let's get that to 90. How do we ramp that up? And we're doing the same thing with University of Nebraska at Omaha, which is about 14,000 students, and a lot of the other universities that are in this region. And we think those are big draws. Now, we've figured out, too, that companies have access to young people who are really not their full-time employees, and they do that through summer interns. So we've created an Intern Omaha program where we ask all the companies who are bringing interns in to house them all at University of Nebraska at Omaha dormitories in the summer. So last year we had 160 kids, young adults, who were interning for companies here in town. They all stayed at the same dorms. We had our young professional group orchestrate a series of social events for them all summer long so they could network with each other, so they could learn about the communities, they would see things that they wouldn't normally see, so they wouldn't just leave their office, grab dinner, and go back to their apartment and wait there until work started the next day. They actually would have things to do in the evening. And we ended up with a survey at the end of that where 86% of them last year said that if offered a job in Omaha, they would take it. Now, that's a big deal. So this year, we've already sold out. We're at 180 interns this summer. So it's a great partnership between the university saying our space is open and available, our company saying we'll pay the rent for these kids to be there, and us orchestrating a series of events so those kids have an opportunity to learn more and more about the community. So, I guess our focus has kind of been, we got all these people here, how do we make sure they're interested in staying? And then how do we make sure our messaging externally is going to be something that young professionals will consider when they're thinking about careers, or even beyond young professionals? How do we know that that software engineer who's trying to think about raising their family, how do we know that we're one of the places they're considering when they're thinking about career advancement? So we're engaging our business community, our university group, everything from interns to college students, and I think doing everything we can, like you all are, to say we want to make sure that the immigration number is a positive one. And so far for both Lincoln and Omaha for the past 5 or 6 years, we have had a positive migration number, particularly in that young professional age category. So we're making strides, I think.
We did one other thing. We did 2 years ago establish a state grant program for internships as well, to 50-50 match up to $4,000. So, and that fund gets completely drained every year.
It's $1.5 million a year the state provides for providing internships to students from colleges, Nebraska colleges and universities, and they'll match 50% what a company will put in, up to $4,000 a year.
Yeah, well, I'd answer the question maybe a little differently. First, I'd tell you that the question that just got asked might be the most important question of the day. We've looked at the brain drain, and you can if you really get into the numbers, the brain drain starts with, at least in the inner cities that we're seeing here in Omaha and Lincoln, a lot of these kids are graduating high school not prepared to join the workforce. So the numbers are declining in terms of number of kids coming out of high school, and the quality of the student from an education standpoint is diminishing, at least in a lot of the areas in Omaha and likely in Lincoln and most of the inner cities. So I would be very surprised if Lexington and Louisville don't have these similar issues. When you look at Omaha, one of the things that was really amazing to me was if you look back 40 years and you look at the net migration, we moved from, let's say, and this is rough math, 500,000 to a little over 800,000, 900,000. The net migration number was less than 30,000. The reason for that was birth rates exceeded death rates. That's not going to be true the next 40 years. When you look at Omaha, if it continues to grow at 1 or 1.5%, and that sounds like a small amount every year, well, it will require a 300,000 net migration to hit our growth numbers. And if you talk to people that see this every day, they tell you this is a huge issue. So then when you look at the existing population base, a third of many employers' workforce will retire over the next 10 years. So you've got this bubble that you need to fill. And if you, as a community, if you can't fill it, these employers are going to go elsewhere. They'll do it quietly, but they'll start locating other satellite offices to fill the void. And so this brain drain is a huge issue. Now, what Jason and David touched on is the University of Nebraska at Omaha, which is at about 12,000, is trying to go to 20,000. The University of Nebraska at Lincoln is trying to go to 30,000. So collectively, between those two institutions, 50,000 students. What's exciting about that is to get that math in the state of Nebraska, you've got to bring students from out of state. It's the only way you could get to those kind of population numbers. So that means if we can bring these kids in from out of state and then keep them, that's a pretty good growth engine for us. Also, these kids that are graduating from high school, they got to be able to walk in to these universities and excel. Right now, the analysis that I've seen, the kids graduating from Omaha High School that take an ACT, and you're measured in 4 elements within that ACT, when asked how the students did in terms of did they meet the minimum standards of all 4 elements, 29% of them did, only 29. So, you know, and when I look at the national numbers, they're very similar. So I think every community's got some form of this issue, and it's a big one.
Yeah, it's probably our big Achilles heel is the more impoverished you are in our community, the worse you do academically. And as you get more impoverished and you lose hope and you disengage, those numbers grow and they get exponential because 1,000 kids 10 years ago now is 10,000 kids if you're dropping out that many kids. And so we've got to do something about, and we're engaged in doing that now. We've got a new superintendent. On Tuesday we'll have a new school board if all works out well. Woody's father's running for school board, by the way. I'm sorry, Danny, I'm sorry. Yeah, Dana's dad, Woody, is running for school board. And so we're in the middle now of trying to figure out how you deal with that 20% of the population that's not achieving at the level that you want them to achieve. And frankly, we don't fix it. All these great plans we've got are going to go for naught 20 years from now. We're not going to be able to meet the needs that we have.
So, Ron, I'm going to have you come back up later. What I want to do, if you still have a question, he may have answered it, but I want to bring a new face up on stage. I don't feel like you're such a new face still. Come on up, Craig. Craig Richard is the new president and CEO of Greater Louisville, Inc., and I've told him this probably 2 or 3 times. I've said that it's probably not fair, but I want to put you up here and get some of your thoughts. But once you come over here, we'll just do this for you.
Slide the chair back.
Oh, slide the chairs around.
Good to see you, Chris.
So when I came in, there was this, when they found out that you were leaving, Jason, and then I'm talking to Jason, and he knows Craig, and it's a small world in our line of business. But Craig joins us from the Greater Houston Partnership, which is by far one of the best economic development entities, chambers of commerce in the country. He headed up the economic development side. And we had him out to Keeneland, and after it was over, Jen and I looked at each other, it was like, wow, very engaging, very candid, which was very refreshing, and also he just connected right in with everyone there. So what I want to throw over to Craig is just kind of initial observations coming into Louisville, the region, and just some of your kind of general thoughts of how we can even work together more closely going forward. Is that fair?
That's fair. Thanks,
right.
Bob. Well, first of all, let me just thank Bob. I mean, when we announced that I was actually going to move to Louisville, Bob was one of the first people that reached out, called me, contacted me, sent me a card to welcome me to Louisville. And he really just set the stage for my arrival and my transition to Louisville in Kentucky. And I tell you what, it hasn't been disappointing. From the moment I got here, the people have just been welcoming me with both arms, and it's been just a terrific transition. That's my initial observation, is that when you get to Louisville in Kentucky, the folks there will just embrace you like you've never been embraced before. And coming from the South, I've worked in Virginia and in Texas. You know that that's just the culture, you know, this Southern hospitality and charm. But Kentucky just takes it to a whole different level. And I've heard that here in Omaha, and the people here have just been fantastic, very welcoming as well. Initial observations, I was glad to hear some of the challenges and opportunities that were presented here in this discussion is really universal. I had some of those same issues and opportunities when I was in Houston trying to build a regional organization there. And I'll tell you what, there is no greater effort underway to really build that unity as a region. And when you're starting with the business community that's leading the way, and the opportunities that GLI and Commerce Lexington has already undertaken to just bring the business community together. And then you have the mayors following suit with BEAM and some other initiatives. It really sets the stage for something spectacular to happen. And I'm just really excited to be a part of that.
Great. Okay, I want to throw it back out. Questions? Thoughts? Ryan, I don't know if you got your question answered a little bit earlier. We got a question here. George? Gaming? Okay.
Oh, I would suggest that every topic was discussed ad nauseum. I mean, there was not a single stone left unturned by either side suggesting that it'd be good for education or bad for education, good for social services, bad for social services, good for jobs, bad for jobs, good for taxes, bad for taxes. And it was as intense an issue, because remember, these are all driven by casino organizations who want to build casinos. And so there was no lack of money behind all the campaigns that go for or against gambling here. I think Tom Osborne probably has, his biggest issue, he has a moral compunction against gambling. It's really in his heart. He just thinks that it's just something that we shouldn't support with public dollars, or that it's a bad thing to have in your community.
Philosophically, both Warren and Tom view it as a tax on the poor.
Yeah, that's how they look at it.
That's their issue.
And I think that resonated remarkably well with people saying, this is going to sound kind of odd because we don't get some of the big economic benefits that you see, but a good number of the people voted against it because if I want to go gamble, I can go across the river, and it's a 5-minute drive. And so we were doing just fine without it, so why do we need to take that next step? So that's kind of how it kind of flew, I think. Well, it's sort of accurate. We have a state pension fund that is actuarially sound, and we make appropriate payments so that it can support its obligations. It is not 100% funded, but it is funded based on what the actuaries tell us it needs to be over time. That's at the state level. Although we are now doing a repair in that because some of the estimates that were significantly down, and so they had to actually put an infusion of more cash into it from the general fund this year to get it to a point where we wanted to make sure that it continued on. We do have a constitutional law that says we cannot incur debt as a state, which means you have to have a balanced budget. That doesn't mean that we can't issue bonds based on revenues that come in for roads or for bridges or for other projects, but those have to be funded with a revenue source that's unique to fund those bonds. So a gas tax for a road bond, as an example, is an example there. The good news, though, is we have about a $600 million surplus at the state after this year's legislature. We end up with about $50 million extra dollars this year for the legislators to fight over for where that money was going to go into the budget this year. And while we haven't had extra money the last few years, and there have been budget reductions, we have had enough of a rainy day fund, actually 2 rainy day funds, that we're able to pull in and fund those gaps in the years we didn't have money coming in, so we didn't have tax increases happen, during the down times. Now that's the state story. The local story is our budget, again, here has to be balanced every year. Our pension, our police and fire pension in this city is a mess. We have figured out a way to pay for it, but it's an expensive process. The mayor talked about tax increases, I guess, when he was here. We were not one of those folks that supported those tax increases to fund the pension challenge. I served on the pension commission that looked at alternatives. We believe that there are other ways to fund some of those pension things by reducing benefits in large measure more than they were done. But in the end, we have a plan in place to fund all of those pension obligations, and actuarially, we are moving in the right direction. We think it was kind of an expensive solution, but nonetheless, the pension fund is a big number here, and particularly for police and fire, and it's still a significant challenge because it is still an overly generous pension system and an overly generous healthcare system for police and fire in the community, and it needs to go a long ways yet in order to get to a point where the population here at least believes that it's a reasonable pension plan for police and fire.
One thing just back on the gaming question, who went to Mammal College of Business?
They were all there.
Everybody went there?
Yeah.
Well, so you were standing on the turn on one of the largest horse race tracks in the country, top 10 in terms of pari-mutuel wagering at Exarban. That's where the old Exarban racetrack was. So Omaha had gaming. It was huge. We had people coming from Kansas City, Minneapolis. There's 30,000, 40,000 people there on weekends. And the pari-mutuel wagering, again, was top 10. And Council Bluffs opened up a dog track and started to migrate the gaming into a different form, took on the casinos, and basically took our racetrack out from underneath us. We didn't move quick enough. And the reason that I think it makes a lot of sense. My response is, well, yeah, the tax on the poor is our poor, so give us the money to offset that. But the issue is this is a problem right here on the banks of the Missouri. For Nebraska to pass legislation, it would be for the whole state to take on gaming, so you're introducing casinos across the state. And the reality is the biggest challenge is right here, and we just don't have enough of an ability to address that and require the whole state to take on gaming. But we have a history of gaming here in Omaha.
And actually, I believe that if this could happen, I'm not sure it could, but I can envision a process where the state and the community agree upon which casino operator we want to operate with and under what requirements and criteria they would have to build a certain kind of facility, how many facilities across the state, how rural Nebraska and urban Nebraska and the other cities in Nebraska could share in that, and actually a holistic strategy that says this is what it ought to be statewide. I think you can get the voters to vote for that. The problem is getting to that, everybody to the table, and understanding that we're going to pick and choose who's going to do this. And I think we can get the answer resolved, but I think you're going to find howling is going to start as soon as one gaming operator is selected, and you'll end up with 3 or 4 options again, and that'll split the votes, and it'll die again. So I'm just not convinced we can figure the politics out to get to a point where we only have one choice that the voters can look at.
And I want to go back to another issue, and this may be our last question that we can have, but something that really troubles me, and Danny, you really hit on it, and all of you did when you talked about workforce, and then you started talking about the impoverished and those that kind of get left out of this. What are you doing on the achievement gap? I mean, we cannot walk away from that part of our community that struggles, and quite frankly, we need every person to have a degree and to be able to walk out of high school into college or into the workforce and be prepared. What are you all doing to address that?
Let me take that.
Or I will, whichever you want to do.
Well, I would say, David's going to hit me on this one, but you know, clearly not enough, so let me start there.
I agree.
The other thing too is, we do this as much as probably anybody, but I think a common mistake is people are confused between serving poverty and solving poverty. If you look at a lot of the solutions that are out there and you really are honest with what it is, you know, it's transportation that helps the poor get from point A to point B. That's not solving poverty. The issue is there's no immediate gratification to solving poverty. It's a long haul. If you start on something, you know, you're going to look 20 years down to know whether or not you're making any inroads. You know, right now we have early pre-kindergarten advancement. We're trying to pick up what I would call the inventorying these children, understanding where they are in their current advancement academically, and then if they're falling off, we've got to get a lot better about finding where they went and getting them back in school. One of the statistics that are out there in most inner cities is mobility. No Child Left Behind, which I'm sure everybody's somewhat familiar with. If a student doesn't begin the year or end the year in a classroom, their test scores don't count in the analysis of a classroom. In the inner cities of Omaha, the mobility rate's 30%. So that means that 30% of the scores are not even counted in these achievement gaps. Those mobility students are the most at risk. So the worst scores aren't even in this analysis. So I would argue the achievement gaps that are concerning us aren't even right. We're starting to address that. The state of Nebraska is one of the few states that actually allowed its school districts to create their own tests. And so we didn't even do broad state tests for comparison purposes. We're just now doing that. That's a big effort on the road to assessing the achievement gap. But what's happening a lot of times is these kids are rolling into 7th and 8th grade. They've been in and out of schools. The curriculums aren't matched up, so if they move from one school to another, they could be learning the same thing twice and missing something. And when these kids show up in 8th grade, the sad reality is there's not much you can do to try and turn them around. Now, you can push them through the system and get a degree in their hand, but again, they enter the workforce not prepared. And it's a big issue, and I haven't heard of any community that's figuring out how to solve this, and I can say I've looked at a few of them.
So now you've gotten the bad news. Let me kind of set the frame a little bit. Everything that Dana said is absolutely correct, but you have to frame it in the picture of scale. We are a very small state, 1.8 million people. The average high school graduation rate in this state is about 88, 89%. If you look at the Omaha Metro, it's in the high 80s, low 90s. If you look at just Omaha public schools, and I can't speak for Lincoln public schools, but the urban school districts across the state all have the same challenge. For us, it's about 75% graduation rate. It's about a 50,000 student enrollment. We just celebrated 24 kids this week who had perfect scores on the ACT. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is that we have terrible African American poverty, particularly at the children's level, and that is reflected also in academic achievement gaps within our public education system. If you just looked at the numbers for Omaha schools and for Nebraska schools, the numbers are terrific. Our percentage of adults over the age of 25 with a college degree, well above the national average. Our graduation rate's well above the national average. I mean, overall, holistically, boy, it looks like we got no problems with education. The reality is that with 4% unemployment, which is now going to get down to in the mid-3s, you guys have been below 4 for quite a while, we're going to have to look at every single person in our potential workforce to say, how can we make sure these folks have productive lives and can be productive members of our labor force here? And this is where the real challenge shows up. For 18 years now, we have been playing this shell game in Nebraska by saying we don't have to do what everybody else in the country does. We can test our own kids based on our own standards and our own possibilities. And so I couldn't compare my son's diploma from his high school with the high school diploma from Lincoln because they all had different tests and they all had different standards. So 4 years ago now, the state passed a bill that required one common set of testing across the state. Hallelujah. We now have accountability that says all the Class A schools, here's the standards we're going to hold for you in Class B and Class C, et cetera. The governor's done a great job of saying if we can keep track of how our athletic teams do by classes for high school size, let's do the same thing for academics and hold those similar sized high schools and middle schools, et cetera, accountable to each other. Who's doing best and who's doing worst. We've got a new superintendent in the Omaha Public Schools, just started. He'll start actually in a couple of weeks. We'll have a new school board Tuesday. The election we'll see wholesale change, I think, on that school board. And so the first 3 steps have happened for effective education reform. A crisis has been identified. We've got an accountability measure in place. We'll have a new superintendent and a new school board. And now you've got an engaged business community saying this can't stand. This is the one mark against us that is inconsistent with everything else that Omaha and Nebraska stands for. We're quality, quality, quality down the line, and for some reason, for the last 18 years, we've allowed this academic achievement gap to fester and to become a problem that we need to fix. And the good news is it's scalable, 50,000 students. We can tell you by name which students did not make it well from kindergarten to first grade and from first grade to second grade. You can actually get down to the nitty-gritty and know which of the kids need help. And it is a central problem that we've got to fix, or all these grand plans and all these cool places that you've seen, it's all going to be for naught, because we're going to have this Achilles heel that's going to snap, and we're going to find ourselves in a situation where every single resource we spend has got to be dealing with the outcomes of us not worrying about this academic achievement gap. We're on top of it. We're spending a lot of time and energy on it. It's bad, as Dana says. It isn't all bad, but we got to fix this piece if we're going to be the kind of community that we want to be.
And with that, I have already gone over our schedule. We could spend a lot more time. Will you be around if individuals have questions?
Bob, can I make one quick comment?
Okay, very quickly.
I want to ask them or invite them to come visit us in Fayette County. And we know we have a lot of work to do, but we are addressing the issue. And one of the things that we're looking at, and I'm going to ask our business leaders to support us in, is the way we allocate resources so that our resources are allocated to the students with the greatest need, which may be considered by some people to be inequitable, but it really will be equitable in the long run. But we're going to need the support of our business community as we look at allocating resources not equally, but equitably, so that we have greater resources going to those students with the greatest need. Come visit us. Thank you.
Mr. Price is the chair of our school board. Who's
Somehow
with
I
us,
had a
and
feeling.
we have a great relationship with our schools. But I want to thank you all. Dana, David, Jason, we're going to miss you. I've already heard, but congratulations on your job. And Craig, we are looking to develop a partnership that's never existed before to take what Joe and his group took to a much, much higher level. Let's give our panelists a round of applause and thank you.